Well, what I wanted to talk about today, Peter, is there is so much going on in the heavyweight division at the moment. I mean, I think we're sport for choice in the heavyweight division at the moment. I think it's a great era, which I'll come to justify a bit in a moment. But I wanted to ask the question, there's one thing that's not happening, and that's really what's grabbing my attention today, and that is, where is Wilder? You know, I mean, Deontay had a big social media presence. He was a big presence in the world of boxing, obviously, for a long time, and it just seems to have all gone quiet. People have remarked on this. You know, Tyson Fury put up a post the other day saying, "Where you at, Mush?" You know, and then there's been talk of the Fury fight maybe drifting away and him fighting Joshua. But, you know, I mean, I wanted to recap a bit. I mean, come back to what I first said. I think this is an amazing heavyweight era. I think it's an incredible heavyweight era, you know, and we're sport for choice. It's always difficult to spot this when you're in the middle of it. But, you know, if we think back briefly, you know, the 70s, obviously, those were the halcyon days. You know, you had Ali, you had Frazier, you had Foreman, you had Norton. Latterly, you had Holmes, you know, absolutely all-time greats, you know, fighting each other. And we all think about those days, you know, like I say, as the halcyon days. Then, of course, in the 80s, we had Kid Dynamite come along. Tyson came along and cleaned up. But that was more one man who was incredibly exciting. But it was still great days. We had a unified champion again. And then, you know, it kind of broke down again. And it was a while, and the next unified champion was Lennox Lewis. You know, and then obviously he had Holyfield and Bowe, you know, although obviously they never fought. So, you know, it was a good era. Then we had the domination of the Klitschko's. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the Klitschko's. I love the Klitschko's, amazing athletes, amazing guys, amazing ambassadors for the sport of boxing. But it was a little bit boring because, you know, particularly with Vladimir, with his sort of safety first approach, and the fact that they were head and shoulders, it seemed, above the rest of the pack. So they cleaned out the division a few times. Now we're into the era of what I'm going to call the three kings. You know, so we've got Joshua, we've got Wilder, we've got Fury. And the amazing thing is to think back on these, the stock of these three champions, each one almost seems like one fight away from solidifying themselves as the unified champion. And, you know, obviously really first out of the starting blocks in a way was Fury when he dethroned Klitschko. And then obviously he went on that bender, I suppose you'd call it, for a while, and then he had the unlikely comeback, and then Joshua seemed to be the leading light coming through, and let's say Joshua's stock was the highest. It just seemed a matter of time until Joshua got hold of the unorthodox Wilder, knocked him out, and it didn't seem like Fury was coming anywhere, so we were going to have that unified champion that we're all after. And then obviously, you know, Joshua seemed to stall, and then was kind of outflanked by Fury and Wilder, who took that fight, delivered an absolute humdinger, you know, and Fury with the ultimate resurrection, that Lazarus-like climb off the canvas in the last round, you know, and Deontay delivering that knockdown, which got him the draw. So, you know, again, then all of a sudden Joshua stock seemed to fall when it was all about them two, and then of course the disastrous running with Ruiz, you know, his stock seemed to fall even further. And I think after that, although he obviously redeemed himself in the second fight with Ruiz, he didn't look as dangerous and as frightened as he was. And oddly enough, I think Wilder's stock was riding high. A lot of us people were saying, well, look, Fury's had one good performance in the last few years because, again, he went in against Otto Wallin, and, you know, he didn't look great, and so, you know, sustained that cut. So I think, you know, on the back of that, Wilder was maybe the number one. So we've gone from Fury being our presumed number one with the other two need to be dealt with, to Joshua being our presumed number one with the other two need to be dealt with, to Wilder being our presumed number one with the other two needed to be dealt with, and then Fury comes along and takes Wilder apart. Absolutely delivers a masterclass. So now you could argue that Fury, out of the three kings, is sitting on top, but obviously Joshua is hard on his heels. And what's happened to Wilder? You know, this is the big question, because let's think about what happened in the immediate aftermath of that defeat. Now, the defeat came about because Mark Breland threw the towel in, you know, after 8 very one-sided rounds, when it looked like Wilder was in serious trouble of getting very badly hurt. So I think a great call by Breland. And in the immediate aftermath of the fight, Wilder gave a very dignified in defeat speech saying, you know, I'm going to be back, the better man won, and real hats off and kudos to him. And then he went off and sacked Breland. Now, this again is a bit understandable because part of the corner's job is to boost the fighter psychologically. Now, when you throw the towel in on your fighter, and I've done it before as well, you almost want the fighter to blame you. You want them to say, look, I was going to turn that fight around. I was going to come back. You know, they were one punch away from getting seriously hurt. But you want them to think that you ruined it for them, and that's great because then psychologically they're not in such a mess. Especially a fighter like Wilder, who was so dominant and would just destroy people with that punch. For him to get stopped like that, so he sacked Breland, you know, which seemed to be a bit churlish, and later reinstated him. And then he came out with a quite bizarre, almost like Game of Thrones a few days later, talk on Twitter, talking about being a king, being a warrior, rising with his people, a phoenix from the ashes. It was all, you know. It was all kind of poetic, and then it kind of all went quiet. And so, and then as we've gone along, obviously COVID broke. So COVID, stopped anything happening anyway. And but now we're kind of coming out of that phase, and Fury, as always, is vocal. I mean, he was vocal even when he was on his hiatus. He's always saying stuff on Twitter, and he'll say one thing, he'll say another. He was calling out a WWE guy 2 days ago, and he's obviously even in that he's mentioning the Joshua fight, talking perhaps about the Wilder fight, and then he started saying, "Oi, Mush, where you at?" to Wilder. And total silence from Wilder, and Joshua's kept his profile quite high as well, and obviously he's potentially got the Kubrat-Pulev fight coming up. But with the silence of Wilder, more and more people have been saying, even Eddie Hearn, let's look at a December fight for Joshua Fury, get it all sorted out, even almost write Wilder off. So I did a bit of digging to try and find out what has been going on with Wilder. And a friend who works for the WBC, I went to them and said, look, there's all this talk of this fight, the third fight, not happening. What do you say about that? And he said, from the WBC's perspective, that it's nailed on. Wilder is fighting Fury. That's the next event of the WBC title. He did say they were gonna push Dillian Whyte back. They're all mandatories were going to be made to step aside for this fight, obviously because of the magnitude of this fight. Now that problem of Dillian Whyte being the WBC #1 contender for over 1,000 days obviously went away last weekend, quite conveniently for the WBC, so we don't have to worry about that. So the WBC, as far as they're concerned, it's all nailed on. I tried to get a bit of word from Wilder's camp. There's lots of stuff coming out of Wilder's camp, but none from the man himself. There's a lot of stuff coming out about Fury cheating the first time. That's why he won. And I wonder again if this is psychological bolstering of their fighter. He only beat you because he cheated. They say they've got a dossier that they're going to release and shock the world about how Fury cheated his way. Now, the only thing that I've heard about this is them saying that Fury's right glove was too loose. And I can't understand. I mean, obviously glove tampering in boxing has been rife through the ages. I mean, looking back at famous cases, there's still rumours, although never proved, that Dempsey's gloves, were loaded in the first Willard fight, and that's how he's able to inflict so much damage on Willard in their first round of their first fight. There's, more recently, I mean, Billy Collins against Louis Resto. Louis Resto famously, the stuffing was picked out of his gloves when he was fighting Collins, so he was almost fighting bare knuckle. I did some terrible damage to Collins, who never fought again. And then more recently, we've had the Antonio Margarito scandal, where Nazim Richardson, God rest his soul, recently passed, spotted that Margarito had loaded gloves, had little bullets in the knuckles before he was going to go and fight Shane Mosley, and that obviously and the bullets were taken out, the hands were rewrapped, and Mosley gave Margarito a boxing lesson, an amazing fight where he was the big underdog, and it cast a shadow of doubt over all Margarito's previous victories, particularly the one against Cotto, where he gave Cotto a real beatdown. Of course, in the rematch, Cotto beat Margarito. So the glove thing it generally goes with loaded gloves. Somehow your gloves are harder. How this argument that Fury's glove was half on, half off makes him hit harder, and they've released some pictures of Fury where it does look like his hand is a bit odd, almost like that, whereas it should be wrapped quite solidly. It looks like that. But I would think this would be a disadvantage to box with a glove that was half on, half off. But anyway, and they keep alluding to other stuff about how Fury cheated, but never coming up with anything. But they have said, yes, he is going to take the third fight. The third fight is nailed on. They've said the only thing, and the WBC said the same thing, the only thing that's holding off the date is the gate. So in other words, in the age of COVID, this can't be a behind closed door fight. So the gate is going to be so massive, the site fee is going to be so massive that you can't just, you've got to wait however many months it takes to realise this extra $30–50 million for that fight. So yeah, so everybody's saying the fight is going to happen, apart from the man himself. But we're just wondering, where is Wilder? Why isn't he releasing videos? Why isn't he talking about his training? Why isn't he pontificating on a few things? He did release one video on his Twitter feed, in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protests, which was, quite a coherent rap about, obviously oppression, and that was it. But nothing about boxing, and it just strikes me as very strange. For a fighter who's previously been so vocal, who's previously been so, such a social media darling, who's previously been so confident in his abilities, to just almost disappear. And it makes you think one or two things. It makes you think, is he in that mountaintop retreat working on those skills that he needs to completely reinvent himself to beat Tyson Fury? Because he was beaten in every department. in that second fight. So he needs to really reinvent himself and work on the skills. But if he was going to do that, I'd say take a few warm-up fights. If you're going to switch trainers, which he doesn't seem to have done, but switch trainers, get some new people in, get some new skills, work out some new ways of doing this. But he's not going to do that. He's going to go straight in with the second fight. And the other thing is, you think, well, maybe he's not psychologically there. Maybe all this bolstering about Fury cheated, it was Breland's fault. Maybe he is, psychologically a bit fragile. But we just don't know because we're not getting any clues. And really, if you are psychologically fragile, stepping in with a man that did that to you immediately is maybe going to be a very difficult thing to do. So the big question to me, maybe other people can enlighten me. I've searched the Twitter feeds. I've talked to the WBC. I've talked to Wilder's camp, and I'm just not really getting the answer. The question is, where is Wilder? The most loosest answer I've had is he's training and waiting. If he's doing that, why isn't he releasing videos? So Deontay, where are you? We love you. It's going to be great to see you again. You're a great tonic for the world of boxing. You're one of the three kings of this fantastic heavyweight era. So put your flag above the parapet, wave it, and tell us what's happening.